Hello friends, my name is Jess and welcome back to my channel, Books Past Bedtime. Today I'm bringing you a video that is about 2 months late, but I have been diligently working on it for the last like 3 or 4 months, so I didn't want to abandon the project, so it's finally here. And so today I'm going to talk about the 10 best thrillers of 2021 according to the Goodreads Choice Awards, and I'm going to let you know if they are actually worth your time and if they were actually the best thrillers of 2021 in my opinion. So I did this video last year as well as reading the fiction nominees last year, and if you saw those videos from me last year, they were definitely like very involved. I predicted what was going to be on the list and like went through the whole process with you. I unfortunately did not do that this year. The stars just did not align for me. One thing, I was in the middle of a huge job transition and job training around the time that the Goodreads Choice Awards was being released, so I didn't have time to do the video in the same way that I did it last year. And also the Goodreads Choice Awards themselves were done a lot differently this year, so it wasn't as conducive to doing it the way that I did it last year, if that makes sense. So basically there was just one round this year where all the nominees were announced and then everyone voted and then the winners were announced. I think there was only the 2 rounds. And yeah, that's basically all the explaining I have to do. I'm sure you know what the Goodreads Choice Awards are. Goodreads is the #1 reading tracking app platform out there, although I am doing Storygraph as well this year, so definitely follow me over there. But every year Goodreads curates a list of the 20 best books of the year, and everyone as users on the platform votes on those books, and then the winners are announced, whoever gets the most votes. A lot of times it's a popularity contest, as is everything in life. And even though there are lots of issues with Goodreads itself as a company and the Goodreads Choice Awards in particular in terms of representation and a lot of the same authors showing up again and again every year just because of their name, it is a fun thing. I'm interested to see what books are on the list, and I always like to see who wins, and I just think it's like an interesting fun time. So that's what we're doing today, is reading the top 10 books in the Goodreads Choice Awards thriller category. So you might be wondering what was on the list. These are the results, like spoiler alert if you didn't look at these 3 months ago. The book that won in the thriller category was The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave. In second place was The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. In third place was Billy Summers by Stephen King. In fourth place was The Push by Ashley Audrain. In fifth place was Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala. Her name is like a tongue twister for me, I don't know why. And then Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead. Apples Never Fall by Leanne Moriarty. The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. Rock Paper Scissors by Alice Feeney. And in last place on the Goodreads Choice Awards list was Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. When the list was originally announced back in November, I had only read The Maidens by Alex Michaelides, and I had also started The Push by Ashley Audrain, but I had only made it to the 50% mark. I hadn't finished it. So I had essentially 9 books that I had to read for this video. All of these almost were already on my TBR, or at least on my radar, so I was interested in reading pretty much all of them. Let's just jump right into my wrap up, what I thought of these books, and how my personal ranking compares to the Goodreads ranking. So as I just said, I had already read The Maidens by Alex Michaelides prior to the list being announced. I read it back in August. In this book, we're following our main character, Mariana. When Mariana's niece, Zoe, who's also essentially her adopted daughter, loses one of her best friends in college, I think she's also her roommate, this girl dies. She calls up Mariana, and Mariana goes to kind of be with Zoe for a little bit, comfort her. Zoe goes to school at Cambridge University, so Mariana goes to visit her there. And then pretty soon after Mariana arrives, Zoe makes some comments, some insinuations that lead Mariana to believe that Zoe's friend was possibly murdered by this professor named Edward Fosca, who is kind of a cult-like leader of this secret society of female students. And so the two of them quickly start to investigate, and their investigation kind of tumbles into an obsession. This book is dark academia at its finest. It really has all the perfect elements of a dark academia book. It has murder, set in Cambridge, like the oldest university ever, secret cult-like societies, creepy old professors, and honestly just like immaculate vibes. The vibes, man. Reading experience of this was so fast-paced, high stakes. I was kept on the edge of my seat the entire time. I'm also grantedly easy to shock, but the twist ending of this was pretty good. I definitely didn't see it coming. I also really loved how this took place in Alex Michaelides' universe of his previous book, The Silent Patient, and had some character crossover. I thought that was super interesting, and I liked how we could see the timelines converge. Although one of my biggest issues with this book was there was a weird ick factor to the plot twist that I felt like was just included for shock value and not really any other purpose. This didn't get a full 5 stars for me. It got a 4-star rating because I definitely really enjoyed it, but it wasn't as strong as it could have been. And of course, because this is the first book that I have read on this list, it gets the #1 spot by default. But spoiler alert, it will not be staying there. The next book I finished was The Push by Ashley Abdrain. This book follows our main character, Blythe Connor. She is determined to become the mother that she never had. She comes from a line of like abusive, neglectful mothers, and when she finds out she's pregnant, she's initially very scared, but she really wants to be for her child what her mother was not. But once her child comes into the world, she has a really hard time forming a connection and a bond with her, and actually starts to think that her daughter may be evil and actively trying to harm people. But we as the reader don't know if this is in her head or if this is a reality, if Blythe is actually seeing the truth. I've never before read quite so visceral of a story. This book was a very intense reading experience. It's jarring and graphic and really just alters your perspective on how you think of things like motherhood and marriage and life in general. And honestly, the scenes of paranoia and the feeling of like no one believing you were truly chilling and terrifying. It's definitely one of the most unsettling books that I've read in a long time, and the ending is terrifying, but I really liked it. It was satisfying, honestly, but also kind of open-ended in a way also. So I really enjoyed reading this one. I'm giving this one a 4 stars as well. It just was missing a little bit something that would push it over into the 5-star range, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good, and I'm actually going to put it before The Maidens in my current ranking. The next book I finished was Apples Never Fall by Leanne Moriarty. This story follows the Delaney family. Stan and Joy are the matriarch and patriarch, and they have 4 children amongst them. Stan and Joy seemingly have this perfect marriage. They own a business together and seem to be just as in love now as they were when they first met, but behind closed doors they're actually miserable and having quite a few problems in their marriage. And then when Joy goes missing, the whole family scrambles to figure out what happened to her, and a bunch of unusual truths come to light that paint Stan in a kind of suspicious light. Maybe he actually did something to get rid of his wife, or is somehow knows more than what he's letting on. There's also this element of this mysterious visitor that Stan and Joy had a couple of months back. Her name was Savannah. She just showed up at their doorstep unannounced. She was a stranger, but Stan and Joy took her in out of the goodness of their heart, and she became kind of like a surrogate 5th child. She is also missing, so there's something fishy going on there as well. Honestly, no one does a domestic thriller like Leanne. I don't know what it is about her stories, but I just eat them up. They're so rich and well developed and well paced. I don't know. I feel like I'm the unpopular opinion on this one because this one honestly got some pretty negative reviews, but I thought it was just as great as the other books by her that I've read. We get alternating POVs and timelines in this book, so everything is revealed at a great pace, and like we learn things along with characters in a way that feels like we're solving the mystery. I also really loved how we delved into the backstories and current situations of all of the children, as well as Stan and Joy and their marriage. I feel like we really got to see all of the different relationships and interactions between everyone and how everything kind of comes to a head with Joy's disappearance. I really loved how every character was explored and given their own story within the story. I felt like it made it such a rich reading experience, and I really enjoyed learning about every single character. I will say that the ending of this book was pretty convenient, but it was so convenient that it was in like a funny, hilarious way. Like, I thought it was just great. Like, I thought it was funny, but I can see how some people would be annoyed by the ending. That was a major complaint that I saw in negative reviews. Overall, I really liked this one. I don't have a lot of negative to say about it, and I'm gonna give it 4.5 stars, and so it will be ranked first in the list of these books as well. The next book I finished was The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave. I wasn't totally sure what to feel about this one going in. I feel like I hadn't honestly heard a lot about it up until the Goodreads Choice Awards, so it's hard for me to gauge whether I would like it or not, but I really freaking liked this one. So in this story, we're following Hannah Hall, and at the beginning of this story, Hannah's husband Owen goes missing without a trace, and the only thing he leaves behind is this note for Hannah that says protect her. And Hannah knows for a fact that this is referring to Owen's stepdaughter, Bailey, and Bailey and Hannah don't have the best relationship. Bailey lost her mother when she was younger, and it's just hard for her having a stepmother. She's in high school. They just don't have the best relationship, but they are newly united by this fact that Owen has gone missing, and they both don't know where he is, and they both are desperate to find him. So they set out to discover the truth together, but as they begin putting together the pieces of Owen's past, they kind of discover that maybe he was living a different life than they thought he was, and there might be more sinister at play than they would have thought. So like I said going into this, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. It sounded like a domestic thriller, and that's not always my cup of tea, but this one turned out so much better than I expected it to. As soon as I started reading it, I was hooked. I read it so quickly, I could not put it down. It's such a well-crafted mystery. I would honestly call this a mystery more than a thriller, although there are some thrilling aspects, especially towards the end. But honestly, where this book shines is in its characters. Hannah and Bailey were such interesting characters to read about. I really loved their dynamic, and I really loved the like stepmom, stepdaughter relationship and how they came together, came to trust one another and believe in one another and form their own relationship separate from just the connection they had through Owen. It really made me very emotional by the end. This is one of the few mystery thrillers that has ever made me cry. I got so emotional and so attached to the characters, and I feel like that's a testament to just how well written this book was. I absolutely loved this one. For me, this was like an easy 5 stars. It was one of my favorite books that I actually ended up reading in 2021, so I'm very grateful I read it. And so this one also will move right into that top spot. I can definitely see why this won the Goodreads Choice Awards. It's definitely up there for me as well. The next book I finished was Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. In this story, we're following Mr. and Mrs. Wright. Their marriage has been strained for quite some time, so when they win this weekend getaway from a raffle at one of their jobs, they kind of jump at the chance to take it. They are going to go away to the Scottish Highlands, try to spend some time together and repair their marriage. But as it turns out, they actually did not randomly win this trip. One of them is lying, and there's someone out there who does not want them to live happily ever after. So I was so excited to pick this one up because snowy isolated thrillers are my jam. Like, I don't know what it is about them. I'm obsessed. They're always my favorite. And this one definitely had the perfect vibes. These people get snowed in at this creepy snowy cabin in the woods with no one around except for one person. And this was a very fun, easy read, but I would describe this as like a surface level thriller. It's something that like if you just read as is and don't think about it too much, it'll be a fun time. And it was a fun time reading it, but I had a couple issues with it that I can't ignore. One major thing is it's definitely not a feminist book. Like, the girls aren't girls in this book, so that's something that I didn't necessarily love. It's done alright in this book and kind of plays into the plot, but of course I would have rather something different happened, you know? I also do think that the twist was kind of like a cheap shock value twist and didn't really make a whole lot of sense throughout the story. Like, looking back, there's not really a lot of context clues or anything that, I don't know, the twist I think was too far out of left field to have made a lot of sense with the story. So approaching this from like a lighthearted manner, I think this was a good thriller, but I've definitely had a lot better. It wasn't incredible by any means. I ended up giving this one a 3.5 star, and I'm actually going to slot it in last in my current ranking because The Maidens, which is currently last, was a 4 star and definitely better than Rock, Paper, Scissors. So it's getting last for now, but it won't stay last for long because the next book I read was The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins, which I fucking hated. So The Wife Upstairs is a gothic thriller retelling of Jane Eyre, and it's a little bit too on the nose of a retelling, which is one of my least favorite things ever. I hate when retellings are too on the nose. I much prefer if it's like a clever, subversive retelling, you know, but this one was just like too obvious for me. So in this book, we're following Jane, and Jane is a dog walker to the rich in this posh neighborhood. And in this posh neighborhood, she meets a man literally named Eddie Rochester. Eddie is recently widowed and very rich, and he invites Jane in for coffee one day, and they strike up this conversation and eventually a friendship and relationship. She starts walking his dog and eventually weasels her way into his life and becomes his fiance. But despite their burgeoning relationship, Jane is very much haunted by the stories of Bea, who is Eddie's previous wife, and Jane also has a bit of a past that she is running away from, so she's got some issues in her life. And honestly, my biggest gripe about this book was that it was boring. I felt like nothing happened. I felt like the stakes were so low, and the whole time I was reading, I just really wanted this book to be over. Like, I did not want to keep reading. I did not care what happened. I feel like a majority of the story was spent in Jane's head with her being insecure about herself. We spent a lot of time with other ladies of the neighborhood where Jane was trying to convince them that she was one of them. We also spent a lot of time of Jane like feeling like she'll never measure up to Eddie's previous wife, manipulating Eddie into like believing that he really truly loves her. It was a lot of like weird social manipulation, more so than any like truly thrilling elements. I mean, this guy literally, well, spoiler alert for Jane Eyre if you haven't read Jane Eyre, but this guy literally has his crazy wife locked up in his attic. I feel like it could have been a lot more interesting and a lot more high stakes, but it was just a letdown. I don't know. I was really bummed by this one. Rachel Hawkins has written some of my very favorite YA contemporary books, so maybe she should stick to that because this just was not it for me. I ended up giving this book 2 stars, and it is definitely going last in my ranking. The next book I finished was Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala. In this book, we're following our main character, Lila. Lila has recently been through a terrible breakup, and in order to recover and kind of move on with her life, she actually ends up moving back home with her family to help out with their restaurant. But then one day, her ex-boyfriend from high school has become a food critic, and he is eating at her restaurant when he drops dead. Fingers quickly point at Lila and her family's restaurant. Lila in particular gets blamed for its death, but she is adamant that she has nothing to do with it and is determined to find out who actually did have something to do with it, so she sets off on her own investigation to prove her innocence. Now, I think this book is technically categorized as a cozy mystery, and cozy mysteries are just not really my cup of tea. There's nothing wrong with this book per se, but I didn't necessarily enjoy it that much. One of my biggest complaints was this book felt repetitive and really low stakes. A lot of the book involved Lila going to various different restaurants that this food critic had eating there, and like interviewing the people that own it about this food critic and if they would have any reason to want to murder him. And that happened a lot, and it was just the same thing over and over again. Also, the low stakes, I just felt like the tone of this book was just kind of strange, and I guess that's the point of a cozy mystery, is that it's supposed to be kind of like flighty and quirky and humorous, where I prefer my mystery thrillers to be pretty dark. And so somebody literally getting murdered and dropping dead and it not being given the gravity that that situation owes was just kind of jarring to me. I thought it was a little bit strange, and our main character is just like flitting around and getting arrested and getting out of jail, and no actions really seem to have any true consequences, which it bothers me when I'm reading a book. And everything in general was just a little bit convenient and unrealistic. I also had some trouble like remembering what characters we would be talking about. There were 2 different love interests in this book, and I kept getting them confused, and I didn't really know why they were love interests in the first place because we didn't spend a lot of time with them at all. I don't know. Those are my issues with this book. I will say though, like, I enjoyed the reading experience. Like, it was fun. It just didn't have any depth to it, so I couldn't give it a higher rating. This book also had a lot of like casual queerness in it, which I appreciated, and I also loved like the descriptions of the food and the culture. Lila's family was also great and really funny, but overall I just didn't really connect with this book or love it. I ended up giving it 3 stars, and it's going to go in second to last place in my rankings, in between Rock, Paper, Scissors and The Wife Upstairs. The next book I finished was Billy Summers by Stephen King, which is another book that I was really apprehensive about prior to starting this video, but it actually surprised me in a couple different ways. So in this book, we're following our main character, Billy Summers. Billy Summers is a killer for hire. He's a hitman, but he makes sure to only accept jobs where he is killing men that are truly bad and that society would be better off without. So we have a fun, morally gray character situation going on. And Billy Summers, he really wants to retire and get out of the business, and so he has accepted one final job that's supposed to pay really well, but it's a bit of a longer con than he is used to. So he ends up in this new town with this new identity, pretending to be a writer and waiting out his next victim essentially until the hit can be performed. But then after the job, things go awry, and Billy realizes that he has got himself into a situation way deeper and more convoluted than he is used to. And if he truly wants to retire, he has to figure out how to get himself out of it. So this book is super interesting because the climax, or what you think will be the climax, happens at like the halfway point of the book. So the rest of the time you're like, what the heck's gonna happen next? But the second half of the book was really strong. I feel like that's where this book really shone. I was zipping through the last half of the book. I thought it was so entertaining, very much on the edge of my seat. Some of the best thrilling writing that I've ever read from Stephen King, and also like the tightest plot from Stephen King that I've ever read. The first half definitely was a little slow and could have been cut quite a bit, but that's typical of Stephen King. And I do think it developed quite this interesting story that I really did enjoy reading. I really liked following Billy Summers, this morally great character. I also liked all the other characters that were introduced throughout this story and thought that everyone served a great purpose. I also really liked the ending of this one, which I feel like sometimes endings aren't Stephen King's strong point. As a whole, this book was honestly magnificent. Like, if it didn't have the issues that I'm going to talk about in a minute, it would probably be a 5-star read, but unfortunately it did have some major issues that I have to talk about and that really dragged my rating down. So let's talk about those really quick. Number 1, Stephen King always has to add a very strange sexual supernatural element to his books that I don't like, and that ruins them for me. So about halfway into the book, we're introduced to this character named Alice, and Alice is this young girl who Billy ends up helping out. She's kind of down on her luck, been abandoned, and so they kind of are both misfits, outcasts. They band together to help each other. Billy is like a middle-aged man, and Alice is like a 19-20-year-old girl. So things start to get really fucking weird. I really loved Alice as a character, and I really liked Billy as a character when he wasn't having sexual thoughts about Alice. I just really think that this relationship should have stayed purely like a father-daughter-esque relationship. I think that would have made this book so strong if we had just not gone there. Like, why do we have to go there? It's nasty. Like, I hate being inside Stephen King's male characters' heads because they're just so vulgarly sexual, and it just grosses me the heck out. And then it's like wish fulfillment when Alice starts feeling the same way, and I'm like, no, I don't. It's stupid. It's gross. Like, just be father and daughter-esque relationship. Why does it have to be weird? I don't understand why it has to be weird. Anyway, another major issue that I had with this book is there's lots of fat shaming, which is not cool, obviously. And it's unchecked, it's unquestioned. The characters just do it, the narrator does it. It happens consistently throughout the book, and it really grossed me out, and there was no need for it. It wasn't a situation where like us as the reader know that the character is being an asshole by saying this. No, it was like all throughout the narration, multiple different characters. No one ever said anything. It was uncalled for, unnecessary, and honestly knocked a star off my rating. Although I really loved the main plot of this book and the concept behind it, those two major issues were really major issues for me, and I just couldn't see past them at all, so I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. And in terms of my ranking, this is so hard because I did like it more than Rock, Paper, Scissors, so I think I'm gonna slot it in between Rock, Paper, Scissors and The Maidens. Just had so many issues though that I don't know, I can't justify ranking it higher, and I'm kind of debating if it should even go above Rock, Paper, Scissors, you know? I don't know. I was certain that the last thing you told me was going to remain in my #1 spot, but I was wrong because then I read Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby and was blown the fuck away. This book follows two men, Ike and Buddy Lee. They have pretty much nothing in common except that their sons were in a relationship with one another. Neither Ike nor Buddy Lee really approved of this relationship or is very kind to their sons about it, and also that their sons were murdered. The two men don't have much of a relationship with each other prior to this horrible event happening to their sons, but afterwards Buddy Lee approaches Ike and suggests to him that they get revenge on the people that killed their sons. At first Ike wants nothing to do with it, but the more he learns about what happened, the harder it is for him to resist wanting to get revenge, so him and Buddy Lee team up and they go after the men that killed their sons. This book was so freaking good. It's gonna be one of my favorites of 2022. It was incredible. So freaking good. The characters of Ike and Buddy Lee are both such real, visceral characters. They're so deeply flawed, and you just want to pummel them for what they did to their sons while their sons are alive, but then you just want to admire them for what they're willing to do for their sons in death, and you wish it wasn't too little too late because they really do like redeem themselves. It's just a heartbreaking, gut-wrenching story. It's just insane. The plot is really well executed, but I feel like this book really shines in its characters and the things it has to say about life, and I just loved it so freaking much. It definitely made me sob like a freaking baby at multiple points, and I just want to scream that everyone needs to read this book. This is the book that deserved to win the Goodreads Choice Awards, and unfortunately it was fucking last. Like, are you guys okay? Why is it last? Like, I am so upset. I really wish I had read this sooner, like as soon as it came out, because it was freaking amazing and I really want everyone to read it. Everyone should read it. It was so freaking good. 5 stars and #1 on my list. By far. And then the last book I read was Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead. Well, I say read loosely as I did end up DNFing this book. So in this story, we're following our main character, Ray Carney. Ray Carney owns a furniture store and he really wants to do right by his family. He lives in Harlem and he really wants to help them move up in the world, provide for his daughters and his wife, or his daughter and his son and his wife, and give them the best life he possibly can. But he keeps getting pulled into crime by his quirky cousin and his crooked father. No matter how much he tries to live the straight and narrow, he just keeps getting pulled back into these shenanigans and doesn't really know how to avoid it. So I put this book off for last because it was one that I didn't have on my TBR going into this. It wasn't really on my radar. I wasn't super interested in it. And even reading the description, I wasn't sure. It's kind of like a crime novel. It's also historical. It's set in the 1960s. Just didn't really sound like my cup of tea, and I was correct. I didn't really like it that much. My main complaint was it was kind of boring. I actually made it all the way to 54% through this book, and I was not hooked at all. I did not care what was going on at all. It's kind of a disjointed story too. I think it's told in 3 parts or so. I made it into the second part a little bit. They take place in different years. They're regarding different kind of like criminal exploits, and I just found it to be quite boring. The writing also didn't work for me. The main character goes off on tangents a lot, and they're seemingly random. Like, I don't even know who or what he was talking about half the time. It was hard to follow. There's so many like new characters being thrown in all the time that I was like, I don't know what the fuck's going on. It was just a hard one for me. I did read quite a few reviews that said the last 100 pages really pick up, but I just couldn't hang around for it. I don't want to be reading books that I don't want to be reading, and I feel like I gave this one a very fair shake, and it just was not for me. I don't think it's a bad book by any means. It just is not something I was interested in, and not something that even caught my interest when I started it. So I did end up DNFing this one, unfortunately, so that is by default going to put it at the bottom of my list. So here's my final ranking, and then I will make a graphic that kind of compares it to the Goodreads ranking. So my ranking is fairly different. There are some similarities. For example, The Last Thing He Never Told Me is pretty high up on my ranking, as is The Maidens, Billy Summers, and The Push. But I did like Apples Never Fall quite a bit more than the rest of the population, and obviously Razorblade Tears for me is number 1, so that's completely opposite of the Goodreads list. I do agree that The Wife Upstairs and Rock, Paper, Scissors and Harlem Shuffle should be towards the end of the list. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you today. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books, and if you have, which book you think should have won the Goodreads Choice Awards thriller category in 2021. I definitely think it should have been Razorblade Tears, but if it wasn't, I'm glad it was The Last Thing He Never Told Me, because that was my second choice, obviously. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. Definitely hit subscribe if you want to see more content like this from me in the future. You can also follow me on Instagram to keep up with me on the day-to-day, see what I'm reading, and that's about it. I will see you in the next one. Bye.